Rejection, unfortunately, is something that all of us will experience at some point in our lives. And certainly, I can see that it's quite a pertinent topic at the moment because when I look at my social media feeds, I can't help but notice lots of students and indeed qualified lawyers talking about the subject in the context of looking for either training contract positions or roles for NQs, for example. I remember when I was applying for training contracts and receiving my first rejection, I cried and cried and cried to the point where I could barely breathe. And I felt that the world was caving in around me and that I was just being silly and that I would never get a training contract. So, for me, one of the most important points about coping with rejection and bouncing back is to give yourself enough time to process what's happened, to acknowledge that you will feel a bit rubbish, and to give yourself time to get through that stage of grief, I guess. And if that means having a good old cry, then I think you should just go for it and not feel embarrassed or awkward. It's also important to focus on the positives in life. I knew, for example, that I had a number of other applications that were pending and invites for other interviews. So it was important in a way for me to bounce back and to get myself ready for the next round of interviews. Another important lesson for me is to firstly not to catastrophize. I have this terrible habit that I always see the worst in everything, no matter how trivial a situation is. So I'm trying now and getting much better at focus, not seeing things in a binary sort of fantastic or horrific sort of way, and that's certainly helping me. I'm also trying to not listen too much to my inner critic. I know that personally, I find that I'm the person who offers the most criticism in terms of how I've performed in either applications and interviews. So, for example, although it's really important not to be overly harsh on yourself, it is, however, helpful to do a little bit of self-reflection and to focus on what you could be doing differently going forward. Because from experience, I know that if you keep using the same approach in the context of looking for a new job, then in all likelihood you'll get the same outcome. So think about, is there anything you could do differently with regard to the way you're drafting your application forms, or are there any answers that you need to sort of rethink in the context of a job interview? And remember, it's very important in this market where jobs are far more scarce than they used to be, that it's not all about you. I think that it's really, I'm going to sort of put money on the fact that even some of the strongest candidates will potentially receive no's, because one thing you can't control is who you're up against in the context of a job application process. Finally, I think let me give you another example of when I received a rejection. It was when I was making or thinking about switching from journalism to legal PR. Again, I walked away from the interview feeling really good about myself. So when I did receive the rejection, I remember vividly crying down the phone to the recruiter, really not able to sort of comprehend what had happened. Advice here is recruiter is probably not the right person to cry down the phone to. I would instead find a support network and build that straight away, and have those people you can cry down the phone to and have a safe conversation with. But the final point, I guess, is that I take a very philosophical approach to job hunting. And if a job wasn't meant to be, the employer might not be the right fit for you, then chances are that the reason you got rejected is because it may not have been the right job for you in the first place. And I certainly know in the context of the application for the legal PR job that, frankly, with the benefit of hindsight, I know that I dodged a bullet, because having thought very carefully about how I wanted my career to progress going forward, I certainly now can see why, what I do now with regard to sort of career coaching and careers advice is far more rewarding than working in law firm PR. But of course, it's a personal choice. But as I said, learn from your mistakes, try to stay positive, but don't feel embarrassed or awkward if you need to have a good old cry. Thank you very much for listening, and good luck with your job search.